Welcome to Phil and Ted's Sexy Boomer Show. I'm Ted Bonnet.
And I'm Phil Proctor. Although there are many of us, I am the original Phil Proctor.
That's right. That's right. I've got you. Yes.
I've met two other Phil Proctors in my life. Did you know that?
How'd it go?
I got really confused. Who am I anyway?
I just yesterday.
Well, you're at a loss for words today, aren't you?
Yesterday was mind-blowingly bad news out of D.C. I mean, it's just one thing. We voted with North Korea, Russia, and Belarus, the four of us against Ukraine.
Yep.
And if that doesn't turn your stomach, Dan Bongino, the new deputy FBI director that Kash Patel promised he wouldn't put in office because he said he would put in experienced FBI people. But nope, he lied. What a surprise.
Oh, gosh,
what a surprise.
Really? Oh, no.
And he's put in a hack, a right-wing podcaster. He has some law enforcement background. He might have worked for the FBI at some point,
I think
which
he
is
was
scary.
arrested a few times.
But he posted this on, I guess, X. This was a while back, but nonetheless, this is the quality of character that is now going to be actually the operational director. And he posted, the irony about this for the scumbag commie libs is that the cold civil war they're pushing for will end really badly for them. Libs are the biggest pussies I've ever seen, and they use others to do their dirty work. And that's a word I wouldn't even use unless a government official did.
That's right.
Their mamas are still doing their laundry for them as they celebrate tonight that their long-sought goal of the destruction of the Republic has been reached. But they're not ready for what comes next. They never have been. It's all revolutionary cosplay with them. Not anymore, as it's all real now. You a-holes, he spelled it out, wanted it. Now you've got it. Good luck. Yes, the number 2 man at the FBI, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Tell me some good news.
Well, I got a job in the voiceover industry.
Oh, good.
Which is why my voice is tired, because I just came from a session for a cartoon voice in an Adult Swim series that I cannot talk about until it's on the air. But gosh,
you'd have to kill me and the listener.
Right. I have to kill everybody who's listening.
Well,
all those pussies out there. Anyway, it was great fun to be in an actual studio in front of a microphone, doing funny things again for money.
Congratulations!
Right? And I want to give a shout out to my agents at CESD, Kathy Lizio and the gang. I want to give a shout out to my driver, Stephen Allen Green.
You think this is the Oscars or something here?
Yeah. I've got my speech ready. Okay. And I want to give a shout out to the new love of my life, Adele Abrams, for encouraging me not to stop auditioning.
Right.
Because it really gets frustrating, folks. I don't know if you understand it in the voiceover industry. Now, we're doing all our auditioning at home. So, it's totally self-motivating. And you send this stuff out, and then you never hear anything again.
Right.
And this time I actually heard something. Are you available to do the job on so-and-so? And I'm like, yay! So it felt really good, and it's encouraging me to continue to put my voice out there and see if somebody likes it.
Good.
And hires me.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. And Hindsight, the podcast project that we did.
Yeah, wonderful project. Hindsight the day before?
Hindsight the day before. You can find it on all your podcast platforms. But it was nominated for Best Production and Sound Design.
And who did the sound design?
Let me check my name tag. Ted.
Ted Bonnet.
Yes, and it's been nominated for an Ambie, which is kind of the podcast Oscars.
Oh, well, you better get your speech ready.
Okay.
I'll read it for you if you want.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. But I think we should bring in our poor guest who's been waiting patiently in New York.
He is our ghost guest. He's remote today.
I heard he's very remote.
Actually, he's not. He's a very likable, wonderful person. But
hi, Danny. Are you here?
I think so. Can
Hi.
you hear me?
I know. How can you be in two places at once when you're not anywhere at all, Danny? That's the question
It's
today.
pretty intimidating to be on with Phil Proctor, but I'll try not to screw up.
But remember, I'm only one of the Phil Proctors, so you may not be talking to the one who is intimidating, right?
I'm pretty sure you're the one. Long time fan.
Thank you. That's great.
Danny, you have worked in the music business as a personal manager, a record company president, a PR man, and a journalist since the late 1960s. You've worked with all sorts of artists from Led Zeppelin to Steve Earle presently. And we're going to talk about all that. And we're also interesting is that you have a whole other side to you as a journalist. You've written many books. Your latest book is Bloody Crossroads 2020, Art, Entertainment, and the Resistance to Trump, which I would imagine hopefully is getting some sales now.
When did you write that?
It's a little dated. It was I documented the 2020 election, and it was published in 2021. So
wow,
there was a optimism about the culture in the book that was not borne out by recent events. But I did document it, and it was something to do during lockdown. You know, I just kept track of every joke, every song, every tweet from artists about what was going on politically.
Oh, how cool is that?
So you were collecting everything that was being said.
I just thought that what artists, entertainers, comedians, and singers that they were part of the conversation, especially with the reality talk show president, and it's always been an interest of mine. But as I say, it's kind of in the time capsule now.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's as pertinent, sadly, as ever.
Well, unfortunately, the first Trump administration was Girl Scout cookies compared to what they're doing now. I mean, there's no comparison between the two terms.
Well, it's whatever's happening in the moment is always like the worst thing that ever happened. I mean, since this is a boomer show, we talk about the FBI. I heard you guys talking about the new cast of characters there, but goodness, nobody could be worse than J. Edgar Hoover was. I mean, he recorded Martin Luther King having sex and had Black Panthers killed in their bed.
He sucked.
Yeah.
I mean, he actually knew how the organization worked since he had put it all together over the course of decades.
Yeah, that's right.
And in terms of the foreign policy sins of the country, I think killing 1 million Cambodian civilians was probably just as bad as some stupid vote in the UN. So it's not been that great. I mean, I'm on Pacifica, right? I can say it's not been that great a country before this moment either.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a choice. We could have had a much better situation. But it does reflect how the two-party system has decompensated over the years thanks to unbridled influence peddling.
And money.
Yeah,
money.
that's what I mean, dark money.
And look, 40 years of intense right-wing propaganda, buying up all the radio stations, and then good old Fox TV getting a state-run television thing. I mean, the brainwashing has been amazing, and it's worked. I mean, they've achieved their goal, I'm afraid. It's a slow coup.
To this point, because what they're doing is so radically, blatantly bad that
they're rubbing our faces in.
Everyone I talk to can name 3 or 4 people within their sphere who have been fired or lost their jobs.
So they've either been fired out of their homes because of the fires, or they've been fired. I mean, the fire is in the news, and it's not a pretty picture.
I understand what you're saying, Danny, that everything's relative. You see it more of the same, or?
I mean, I don't pretend to know what he's going to do as president and what his administration is going to do. They certainly laid out plans, that are very unpleasant for those of us that have traditional notions of democracy and who want more more inclusion, more
diversity,
democracy, and not less. But I just think, while standing up for whatever the truth is at any given moment and contributing to the people that keep asking for money through emails as appropriate, and if there are demonstrations that seem to be part of some plan, I'm all for showing up. But we got to live our lives and be decent people. That's, at the end of the day, it's a spiritual crisis of unhappiness that would make somebody like Trump able to win. I mean, there were so many millions and millions of people that voted in 2020 that didn't even vote in 2024. I mean, I think the turnout was 5 million less or more than that. So Trump didn't actually get more votes in 2024. It's just the Democrats got so many fewer votes because they so I think there's a addressing sort of the idea of being a decent person and traditional, like, just morality is and having some ability to enjoy moments like being on your radio show is important, as well as kind of the daily critique that, we're all going to give probably with this administration. As I remember the Reagan years, I wasn't very excited about what he did, dismantling the New Deal.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, the Vietnam period was of course I was a teenager then, and maybe it's not that big a deal historically, but being susceptible to a military draft and
it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
56,000 Americans buried, because of it.
Beat the Reaper.
And then in retrospect, it had nothing to do with national security. Vietnam's a vacation destination.
That's right.
It's like it was a complete pointless exercise in ego and delusion. So, and then you go back in history, slavery, Native American genocide, and human beings.
What do you mean slavery? Wait a minute. You mean job opportunities for the black people?
Yeah,
what are you talking about?
So they could be civilized. Exactly. Yeah. No.
You started before you were in the music business. You were a music journalist, and you wrote for Rolling Stone, Village Voice, Billboard. You reviewed the Woodstock Festival in '69 for Billboard magazine. Wow.
Yeah. I was so grateful. I was such a bad student in high school, and I dropped out of college after 1 week and just found out that there was something called the music business. I got this clerical job at Billboard magazine, and there were these people on the other side of the office who got free concert tickets and free records just for writing their opinions of rock and roll. And I had pretty low self-esteem, but I knew I could do that. So it was a great time. So for a few years, I was a so-called rock critic. I didn't have the greatest work ethic in the world, but I'm a bunch of my pieces are still online because there's this archivist in England called Rock's Back Pages that found it. And my role at Billboard as a writer, when they would let me write things, was if none of the other real journalists wanted to cover something, they would ask me if I would do it. And the real journalists, who were very old, like 30, old guys, they wanted to go to cover shows at the Copacabana where they could get free drinks, and nobody wanted to go to Woodstock. So I was that was my music. I was
far out.
19, So yeah, I was able to go there and rhapsodize about it, and it lives on in the internet. You can still Google my ecstatic description of how awesome it was.
Oh, that's exciting.
But that led to your interest in getting into the music career, and one of the first big artists you worked with was Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, that was really another
How did
lesson.
that happen?
Well, I couldn't make a living as a rock critic. I wasn't going to get the New York Times job or a Rolling Stone full-time job, and I just didn't want to have to ask my parents for money. So I sold out and got a job as a publicist working for an old showbiz firm called Salters and Roskin that did a bunch of Broadway shows. And
I remember them, yeah.
Yeah, they wanted a long-haired guy that could get some of this rock and roll business for them. And then Zeppelin... my boss, Lee Salters, asked me just a few months in, he says, do we want Led Zeppelin? Because he'd not heard of them. He was literally, from the, sort of Sinatra generation of music. And I said, yes, they would be a very good client. And we met him. And after one meeting, I was their publicist because, again, Lee wasn't into their music, and they liked the idea of a younger guy. And my God, it's way more than 50 years later, I still get to talk about Led Zeppelin. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Just having worked with them for a few years, it really it's such a lucky break for me. But
I remember as a kid, buying Led Zeppelin 2 and all. They seemed the most risque, the most edgy of the big bands back then. What were they like personally when in their peak?
Well, I met him in '73. So by the movie that just came out, which is excellent, I recommend it to any Zeppelin fan. Becoming Led Zeppelin ends in 1970, just the time you're talking about with Led Zeppelin 2, the album with Whole Lotta Love. So I go to work for them in '73, and they're putting out their fifth album, Houses of the Holy.
Right.
And they had been sort of shunning the press because when they first came out, they got bad reviews. The rock writers in the late 60s, early 70s, all kind of worshipped the Stones, the Beatles, the Kinks, the Who, Cream, and Zeppelin was considered like a newcomer, and these younger people, to a 27-year-old, a 14-year-old is very young and unsophisticated, and that was the kind of the rock critic aristocracy were in the second half of their 20s by that time. So, but then they wanted to finally get some good press, and fortunately, I was in the right place at the right time. The guy in the band that really was interested in that the most, and who I worked with the closest, was Robert Plant. He really liked to talk to the press. He was articulate. He was comfortable with it. Jimmy Page, obviously, is first among equals in the early years in terms of putting the band together, and he certainly could. Whenever he wanted to do anything, he would do it, but he did a lot fewer interviews than Robert did, and I never got as close to him personally, but he was obviously a brilliant guy. And Bonham was frustrated that the press was not interested in him. He was, many people think the greatest drummer in the history of rock and roll. I'm one of those people who thinks that. But, he was a Jekyll and Hyde drunk. When he was sober, he's the nicest guy in the world. And when he was drunk, you didn't want to be around him. And John Paul Jones, another musical genius. One of the great things about Zeppelin was that they were all so talented. Is, the arranger of a lot of the music, keyboards as well as bass, but very shy. Had no interest at all in being a public figure, although he was incredibly important to the music. So I liked them. I was the young guy, and I just was walking on eggshells, wanting them not to be mad at me. But Robert Plant was just a great guy, and I've been run into him a number of times in the ensuing years. Last time was a couple of years ago, and he's still the happy warrior. He really loves being Robert Plant. And he's had an incredible career post-Zeppelin. He's one of the rare people that leaves a band that goes on to do important records, Grammy-winning records, totally different kinds of music. It's hard to think of many examples of people who come out of big bands and have been able to do that.
I've seen him down at Jazz Fest.
I gotta say, it's really kind of a golden age for olden goldies. For it's amazing to me. My friend Adele, former DJ, has been introducing me to the music scene. Now, I got back from a cruise called the Big Easy Cruise, and I'm telling you, the musicianship of these old dudes. And that they're still rocking, and it's absolutely inspiring and exciting and wonderful. And they've been hanging in there. They're making their music, and it's keeping them going, keeping them young.
Oh, absolutely! I saw an interview with back in the 90s. I managed the career of Bonnie Raitt until I went to work for record companies, and one of the great artists I got to work with. And I just saw an interview with her where somebody's asked her. I guess she's over 75,
yeah, they're in their
76
70s, these guys.
I'm 74. She's a year or two older than me, I think. And they said, well, are you ever going to retire? And she said, why would I retire?
That's right.
She said, my idol is B.B. King, who kept doing it until he was 90.
That's right.
If you're lucky, I love doing this. And you look at something like Bob Dylan, obviously, he certainly doesn't need the money. I mean, he's made hundreds of millions of dollars from his songwriting. But he likes that experience of communicating with an audience that way. Same with Springsteen. He's certainly not doing it for the money.
Oh, it's keeping them young, keeping them energized. We're going to see.
It's what they do. It's the reason
what they do.
They feel they're on the planet.
I say it's really inspiring. We're going to see Judy Collins in concert in New York in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
and you're working with Steve Earle, another favorite.
Yes,
he was so good in Treme that when he was murdered, it was so impactful. I still think he's not alive. That's how good he was in that series.
I know. There's something about that scene that really affected people. It was so good for him as an actor.
Yep.
He loves to act, but his main career, of course, is a songwriter and a performer. And, a great Renaissance guy. It's 25 years I've worked with Steve now. It's by far the longest relationship I've had with anybody.
That's great.
Except my parents.
What's your take on the music industry? We were talking yesterday, kind of remembering the halcyon days of the music business in the 70s when I was in rock and roll radio and we didn't get paid anything. So we relied on these lavish record company parties. There was so much money in the business at that time. I mean, taking over the Tavern on the Green in New York, for Peter Frampton Comes Alive, the double record, which did so well.
Yeah.
And it was a whole night of all-you-could-eat oyster Rockefellers and Moet Chandon by the bottle. And the reps would come up from the companies to the radio stations, and it was, depending on how good the record was they were trying to get us to play on the air would be directly related to how much illicit substances they brought.
I was going to say, rumors were that sometimes there was cocaine involved.
No.
In those conversations. That's just a rumor.
Shocked, I tell you. Shocked.
You've seen pretty much the whole thing of rock and roll, the business, come and go, really.
Well, it's first of all, the music business is not really the right phrase. It's the business is plural because there's several different interrelated business. Like, for example, the concert business, which is a very, very important source of both money, self-expression, and fan connectivity, is really the same business as it was 50, 60, 70 years ago. There's different audience. There's an audience now of people our age or 10 years younger that'll pay hundreds of dollars for tickets.
That's true.
You know, the Fillmore, which was the big A-list venue for rock and roll in the late 60s, early 70s, I think the top price was $5.50.
Yeah.
So even with inflation, if you figure that'd be $60 today, it's certainly not hundreds. I think Paul Simon at the Beacon, the list price on some of these tickets coming up are $1,000.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to see that concert.
I unfortunately passed on you too. I really wanted to see him.
Yeah. So that's a change, that there's an audience that will pay big dollars for heritage artists. That's a change. There are, but the basic business model is pretty much the same. It's how much do you charge for a ticket multiplied by how many people pay for the tickets, and then you subtract the cost of the rental and
the cost of
what the advertising costs are and union costs. But when you're charging hundreds of dollars a ticket, there's plenty of room for profit. And so it's basically the same kind of business model. It's international. It's more international than it was when I started. I mean, I have one of the younger people that works for me, Jesse Bowers, working with an artist named Ash, who's an Egyptian who lives in Montreal now, but who tours all over the Middle East, Egypt, Jordan. I didn't know there were gigs in Jordan, but there are.
Wow.
Saudi Arabia and so on, and Latin America, and of course all over Europe, but also Eastern Europe, which was not a market back in the day. The record business is what a lot of people mean when they say the music business. And the record business, of course, has completely been transformed by technology.
That's right.
There's no more Tower Records. There's no more Licorice Pizza Records.
Back then, substantial income was made by record sales. That's gone, so they kind of have to make it up now in live performance. Do I have that correct? Is it different?
It depends on the artist. It's always been a business where people at the very top do very, very well, and everybody else is not doing as well. So Taylor Swift certainly makes a lot of money from her recordings as well as from her touring. And same as Chappell Roan and Olivia Rodrigo. And, the big pop stars who are streaming hundreds of millions of streams, they're still making money from recordings, and the value of recordings is going all the way back up. It went down by 80-90% when digital technology came in, and there was so-called file sharing, and people could get basically things for free that they were used to paying for.
Yeah.
But now with the streaming services, and there's a lot of controversy about how they divide up the money, and there's certainly improvements that I think could be made, in terms of what would be the optimal situation. But, the reason why all these artists have been able to make so much money selling their catalogs is because of streaming. That's what...
The Firesign Theater has just released one of our records with Rhino, re-released. Yeah, Give Me Immortality or Give Me Death, which you can get now if you go to our website. And that's the same thing. I mean, there is a constant demand for...
Right. But I thought the physical media sales of CDs and albums are over.
Oh, no. Physical is like a collector's business now. There are people that like vinyl. There are some people that still like CDs, but it's under 10%. 90+% are listening through streaming. And there are definitely... some unfairness the way the money is paid out, but of course there was unfairness in the old system too.
Right. That's right.
There were always a lot of unhappy people that felt they were ripped off, and there were a few people that did very, very well. And so I don't think the differences are quite as great as it seems A lot of my friends would say, it's not like the old days. I said, yeah, we're older.
I was under the impression that streaming is like micro pennies, and it's very difficult compared to unit sales of physical media.
Yeah, I don't pretend to understand the minutiae of how they do the accounting on streaming, and it's definitely more opaque than
Yes.
physical sales were.
That's right.
But the aggregate amount of money paid out to record companies and artists combined from streaming services is actually a little bit more than what was paid out from retailers back in
Yeah,
the day.
because the audience is so much
how it's
faster.
how it's divided up. Look, it's very difficult for a new artist. The risks, the record companies are taking much lower risks. So back when I managed Bonnie Raitt, she had been dropped by Warner Brothers, and we couldn't get her a deal. And finally, we got an offer from Capitol Records. We got what was then considered a cheap deal. I think it was $150,000 to make a record. Now, a cheap deal is like $5,000.
Wow.
So, but on the other hand, with digital recording,
Costs a lot less.
it's a lot less expensive
Yeah.
to record. You don't
That's
spend
right.
hundreds of hours at hundreds of dollars an hour in studios. People can make their own records. Music videos, when MTV started, people would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can make a good video for $5,000-$10,000, and so it's different in many ways.
Yeah.
And there are many things that people could criticize about it. I'm a socialist by temperament. I think there's too much concentration of wealth in every business, including the music business.
Good call.
Danny Goldberg, our guest, had a long career in the music business, or businesses. I've been educated. Businesses. You spent some time out here in California. When you were out here in L.A., you served as the chair of the board for the ACLU Foundation of Southern California from 1987 to 94. The ACLU played a big part in the struggle to oust L.A. Police Chief
Daryl
Gates. At the time, the police department was fairly autonomous, and you couldn't just get rid of a chief. And that's when you and your folks got to work.
Well, I was, fortunate enough. I'd been sort of into free speech was the issue that got me interested in the ACLU, because the so-called rock censorship problems, or the way people were talking about the early hip-hop records. But once I got involved with the organization, I realized they were involved with so many vital issues in Southern California. And the Los Angeles Police Department had been a source of contention from a lot of community groups under the leadership of Gates at that time. In the aftermath of the Rodney King, it took 16 months, but eventually the city charter of Los Angeles was actually amended through a ballot initiative, so that the police department today is accountable to the city government the way police departments are around the country. And Gates finally retired. He had been in power, I think, for 14, 15 years, and it was considered a job for life if the person wanted it, because it was virtually impossible to fire the police chief at that time. And the ACLU had been one of the leading critics. They'd had a lot of lawsuits about different things. And my mentor, Stanley Scheinbaum, who had previously been the chair of the ACLU Foundation, and who was a very important kind of philanthropist and political activist in Los Angeles. He had married Betty Warner, who was the daughter of Harry Warner of the Warner Brothers, and he was part of the so-called Malibu Mafia that included Norman Lear and some other wealthy lefties who supported people like Jerry Brown and the ACLU and so on. He was named to be the president of the Police Commission, which was the entity that still oversees the LAPD, by Mayor Bradley. Bradley was in his fifth term. He was the first black mayor of Los Angeles, and really the first black mayor of a city the size of Los Angeles. And he had been an LAPD officer as a young man. And him and Daryl Gates, the police chief, had known and hated each other for 40 years.
Wow.
And after the Rodney King beating was videoed and on all the TV news shows and seen by virtually anyone who watched any news show in the country, it changed the political reality enough that Bradley saw he finally had a chance to make some changes in the police department. So I wrote a book about this, which will be published in October.
Oh, this is your new book.
Yeah, that's my forthcoming book. It's called Liberals with Attitude. the Rodney King beating and the fight to save the soul of L.A.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's why Ted was generous enough to give me a chance to plug it, but it won't be available for another 6 months.
What's the message of the book?
Well, I mean, the main message is to just shine a light on some people that I think you really were idealistic and heroic and did something that's hard to do. It's hard to change police practices. People are rightfully nervous about crime, and it's very difficult to be a police officer. And the vast majority of them don't beat up innocent people,
right.
and are really, for not all that much money, have dangerous, stress-filled jobs. And the public normally wants to be supportive of them to the point, so it's political, and plus they have a lot of political power. So, for example, after the George Floyd murder, a few years ago, which was also captured on videotape, but in spite of the enormous protests all over the country and the outcry and all the different soul searching that a lot of people did, no laws were changed. There was a bill in Congress that was going to make modest reforms and create databases and things, but they couldn't break the filibuster. So the senators that represented only 1/3 of the country were able to defeat something that the majority wanted. And I think that the genius of what Mayor Bradley was able to do with the cast of characters that he assembled was to create a coalition between the center and the left to prevail against kind of white grievance and reactionary politics. And it's very difficult to create a coalition between the center and the left because those of us on the left love to argue. And, there's all sorts of, the Bernie Sanders sucks. Oh, Joe Biden sucks. There's all this sort of, issues on our side.
Disunity.
And that's why, that's where the right wing's able to prevail when there's disunity. So the main lesson is to try to find ways of creating coalitions among people who may be in different social groups and may have different opinions on what the tax rate should be on, or certain issues, but who share basic moral values and are able to function as a team. It's very, very difficult to do, but it was done in Los Angeles in the early 90s. So hopefully it's a story that can inspire some people. And also I just like to celebrate progress. There are not that many victories that we have. They're worth celebrating.
Right. And what's going on in New York with your mayor now, Mayor Adams?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's kind of mind-blowing. I can't say anything that hasn't widely been reported in the newspapers, but let's just say I'm not a fan of our current mayor. I hope we replace him. And, I think when he was first elected, there were really hopes. He had been a police officer. He's a former black police officer. He'd been popular in Brooklyn, and there was a hope that he could be a unifying force at a fraught time, and that's not been what's happened.
Well, he was willing to commute from New Jersey. That's pretty selfless.
Well, up until they had congestion pricing. Now that there's the extra $9, I'm not sure that would be as appealing. Look, as I say, I'm a lefty. There's only been a few mayors I've liked, only a few presidents I've liked, but I think it's important. Life's not just about who gets elected. It's about day-to-day, how you behave, and what the values are that inform people's role when they're working for the government.
And you have to say the role models today are not encouraging of that kind of behavior, Well,
I mean, I think, that's why art is great. I mean, again, to me, Bruce Springsteen's a role model, and Stevie Nicks, and, Jane Fonda, and Taylor Swift, and, Costco, they're raising their minimum wage to $30 an hour. I mean, there are role models out there.
Good.
No, you're right.
Good.
And you also wrote a book about the hippie idea. It was called In Search of the Lost Chord, 1967, and the Hippie Idea. Tell us about that.
Well, I graduated from high school in 1967, and I was just enthralled in New York. And by the way, the radio station I listened to every night after midnight was the Pacifica station WBAI. That was the center of the counterculture in New York City.
Bob Fass.
Period. Bob Fass. And then on weekends, Steve Post, the similar show.
Did you ever listen to Paul Gorman's show, Lunch Pail?
I did. Not as religiously, but I did listen to it.
He was a classmate of mine at Yale. Good friend.
Oh, far out.
Yeah.
I knew, about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, it always been irritated me that the way that the 60s was described sort of on CNN documentaries or kind of a Time magazine, memorial issues, focused so much on 1968, which was the year of the assassinations of Dr. King and of Robert Kennedy, and the disturbances / police riot outside of the Democratic Convention, and the protest and sort of darkness of the period. And I was always thought, 66 and 67 was quite a different vibe.
Mm-hmm. Sure
and
was.
The counterculture writ large, the anti-war protest, civil rights movement, and feminism, and the nascent beginnings of the gay rights movement,
and the birth of the Firesign Theater here at KPFK,
right?
On Pacific Radio,
and what you guys
it was a promising
did,
time,
and what you guys did, and what the culture writ large was doing for kids like me, was fusing some political values with kind of almost some spiritual values. There were a lot of them inspired by psychedelics,
absolutely,
but there was a sense of just redefining what it was to be a human being.
That's correct.
And even though it didn't just automatically change and make utopia and solve the human problem of thousands of years, there was a light. And it was a light that I continue to be inspired by. And so that's why it came up. I stole the title from a Moody Blues song, In Search of the Lost Chord. But that phrase, they didn't invent it either. It went back to Gilbert and Sullivan. Arthur Sullivan and Gilbert and Sullivan coined it in a song about the lost chord.
Genius.
And that there was this combination of sort of political activism on the anti-war movement, civil rights movement, black-white issues, the beginnings of feminism, Eastern spirituality, psychedelics. And to me, as a kid, they were all one thing. And even in, and I wanted to try to, but at the time, these factions were very different. The political people, like even in the Bay Area, the political people in Berkeley thought that the hippies and hate were selling out.
Yeah.
And, Jerry Garcia felt when he heard a speech from Jerry Rubin at the BN, it was like just somebody yelling at him and haranguing at him, and turned him off, not turned him on. But to a kid, it was sort of one group of influences that were very refreshing after kind of the purely materialistic notion of America in the 50s and early 60s. And I just wanted to reconstruct that year. And I spent it was really fun to do it. And that's kind of what the book tries to do, is to examine those different strands and the different things that created the overall sense of optimism that was definitely gone by 68.
That's right.
It didn't last. A lot of things, bad drugs came into it. The Nixon is elected. People are killed. And the commercialization of the hippie ideal kind of made things like long hair and words like groovy suddenly were cartoonish and lame, as opposed to being earnest and meaningful. But there was a time when peace and love was not said sarcastically, when people actually meant it. And again, worth remembering and worth emulating. And so that's what that book documented.
Yeah, that to me was like, that was, for me, I was a kid, it was peak of empire. The 64, 65 World's Fair. I mean, we came out of the Kennedy assassination. That was a shock to the system, no question.
Oh, God.
But the children of the Great War were coming of age, especially in light of Kennedy's assassination, where there was an attempt to say, love, not war. And then it got real ugly really fast in 68.
It was such a pushback.
Yeah.
But what I was saying, it's funny, because I knew we were going to talk, and I love YouTube, because the algorithm kind of knows what I'm interested in now. And so they put up a clip last night of the Jefferson Airplane doing the song "Volunteers for America" at Woodstock, and it's, again, this is, Nixon has been in power 6 or 7 months. It was just as much a shock to the system of people like us as Trump is. All the people he brought in were people just we never would want to have dinner with, and they wouldn't want to have dinner with us either. But they were killing people like us. I mean,
that's right.
And it was a much worse situation than we've had since then. And yet, in the middle of this, music still existed. And they were just saying, there are other things going on in the country besides who's in Washington or Sacramento or City Hall. And that culture and values come from us. and inform what they do, not the other way around. So I do think that changing the political system has proved to be quite difficult.
Yes.
And
Yes, it has.
I'll support anyone who's got a good idea.
Yeah.
But right now, I also think that things like this are important, and the music is important, and just how you treat your neighbor, regardless of who
Right.
they voted for.
Right.
That's just as important. The political media, even the people I agree with, are still addicted to controversy and clicks and eyeballs. And there are things you've got to fight, but everything can't be a fight.
That's right. It's the message of music. And the Firesign Theater during that time, we used comedy to reach people by basically laughing away certain fears and barriers
Oh my God.
to
It's
healthy
so brilliant.
ideas.
Yeah, to relieve
You know,
some
It was
pressure.
exactly right. Firesign Theater to me were absolutely part of the pantheon, along with
Oh
Dylan.
boy,
the
we
Stones.
tried. I'm telling you.
It was, and it meant a lot to a lot of us. There are people experimenting with these tools now.
Yes.
We'll probably be the last to notice them because kids discover them on TikTok, and 5 years later we say, "Oh, Taylor Swift, she's actually can write good lyrics."
Yeah, right now the jesters are the late night comedians.
Oh, yeah.
And probably the first they'll go after.
This other book you wrote is Serving the Servant, Remembering Kurt Cobain. What stood out to you about Kurt that made you want to write a book?
Well, I mean, I've been in the music business for my so-called adult life, and working with artists to me has been the most important part of what I've done in my different jobs. And of all the artists I ever worked with, and I work with a lot of brilliant people that I'm very proud to drop their names. But Kurt was the most brilliant that I ever got to know up close, and it was just, again, it was fortunate. I was an old guy in my early 40s. It seems young now, but at that time I was a lot older than the people in their 20s that were creating the culture.
That's right.
And
all relative.
And I through a set of circumstances, I got to be in a position where my management company managed Nirvana. John Silva, who's a very, very successful manager today, was the other manager of Nirvana, and we did it together. But because of a certain set of circumstances, I ended up getting closer to Kurt personally than I would have originally expected. And then 25 years passed from his suicide until when my book came out, and knowing that I just felt at a certain point there were different documentaries and kind of a public perception of him had developed, and I felt that it focused way too much on his death and not enough on his life.
I agree.
You called Kurt a kind of the last icon of the rock era as the hip hop era.
Yeah. I think that's right. Again, there are some great rock bands, and one of them is Dave Grohl's group, the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
And there are a number of other great rock bands. But the center of musical culture for younger people shifted in the early 90s after rock and roll had a good run from the mid 50s to the early 90s, and then by the middle of the 90s you've got hip hop is dominating MTV, which was then the heartbeat of the musical culture in America, and a lot of that music came from Los Angeles. People like Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and Tupac, from the Bay Area, and so on, and in terms of iconic rock artists, I don't think I'm the only one who sees sort of Elvis as being kind of the certain golden age of rock and roll in terms of its dominance as the main art form, not a secondary one. You can kind of shift from Elvis to Kurt, but certainly from the Beatles to Kurt.
I remember when I first moved out here from New York in '93, and I was still playing a lot of rock and roll, did a rock and roll radio show, the whole thing. And I listened to K-Rock when I first moved out here, and Nirvana was the thing. And it's just funny that you say that, because that's when I tuned out. After that Nirvana rush, those years, I stopped listening. And I thought it was age-related, and it was probably. But it's interesting that you noted it, because it did seem like the preeminence of rock and roll sort of faded at that
There was
point.
a change.
Yeah, it was a change.
Yeah, in terms for young people, it's still an art form, the way jazz is still an art form and blues is still an art form.
Absolutely.
But it's not the zeitgeist of younger people.
That's right.
Right now the zeitgeist are these pop women, people like Taylor Swift and Chappell Roan. They write their own songs the way the Beatles and the Stones did. Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey never wrote their own songs. I mean, or I think Mariah Carey wrote 1 or 2 songs, but Madonna was not a songwriter. But these pop stars are writing personal
Billie
songs.
Eilish. Billie Eilish is.
Yeah,
too.
Billie Eilish. Yeah. So, but so it goes through and then you look at I was rewatching Ken Burns' thing on jazz, and you think of the intensity and brilliance of Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and what jazz was. But rock had its period where it was the center of the zeitgeist for a lot of the culture in the musical culture, and I think a lot of people trace the death of Kurt with the end of that particular chapter. But anyway, for me, I got to work with him, so I wanted to kind of tell my version of the guy that I got to know. And I'm glad it's out there. There's a lot of other good books about Nirvana that I admire, but I think I'm the only one who had that personal relationship who put it in a book.
And that book is available.
I like writing books. It is available.
Yes.
It's in print.
The book is called Serving the Servant, Remembering Kurt Cobain, written by our guest today, Danny Goldberg. Thank you so much.
Hey, you are an absolute encyclopedia of knowledge, and I think we just scratched the surface.
Yes.
So maybe we can have you back.
Danny Goldberg, thank you so much.
Danny.
This is Phil and Ted's Sexy Boomer Show. I'm Ted Bonnet.
I'm Phil Proctor. That's the story.
Yeah. So you're going out to the Springs, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, listen, I'm going to be coming in remote next week.
Yeah.
Hopefully with Steve Bluestein, a wonderful, wonderful comic. And I'll be talking to you from Palm Desert.
Palm Desert.
Palm Desert.
Oh, fabulous.
So
Okay.
that'll be
Well,
fun.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for checking in, tuning in. We
Thanks
love
again,
you.
Danny.
And thank you, Danny. And we'll see you all next week, okay? Take care.
Hasta la vista.